So I was watching Danny Jones' podcast last night. He's a researcher, and his main focus is ancient civilizations. I actually first came across him on Danny Jones. He was on there on a different time, but last night's episode kind of blew my mind. You know, you go on Reddit, people have mixed feelings about him. They're just like, this guy, and some of his theories are a little out there, and I myself am like, because when I was watching the episode itself, Danny, he would push back on a lot of things that Matt was presenting. And, to a degree, I understood it because you have to push back. Sometimes things are just too good to be true. But I feel like he did end his message on a very strong note, and I wanted to talk about some of these things. Now, this is going to be a really dumbed down review, so I listed that episode in a description here, and you guys should check it out because I'm going to give you a very dumbed down version of it. I want to highlight something that I've been thinking about myself a lot lately. I find ancient architecture really interesting, and it's always these structures that we see all around the world that make me question pretty much everything. It's the main reason as to why I'm not religious to begin with. It just doesn't make sense. We have these opulent, insane, these structures, which I think were used as devices of some sort, maybe power plants, I don't know. But I mean, how do we go from that to where we're at now? A lot of things in my own mind don't make sense, but I've been reading a lot of Joseph P. Farrell lately. So now more than ever, I'm kind of like, okay, what's going on? And we all know that the ones that win the wars get to write history as we know it. So I don't know. I feel like now more than ever, people are starting to look more into alternative history with an open mind. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, it was kind of crazy. I just feel like the Western education system is so narrow in a lot of ways. I want to get into something that Matt LaCroix kind of covered, and he does it much better than I do, but this is my takeaway from it. He very boldly, like he said, Matt was saying that Hermeticism will become the new religion. It's going to be the fastest growing religion, and it's going to topple everything that we've ever known one day. And again, Danny was pushing back on that, like civilization worldwide is going to need a huge conscious reshift for that to take place. I'm paraphrasing here, but how could that be, And I thought the same, like, yeah, even though I wish that were to be true myself, but how so? Anyways, Hermeticism, we all know it comes from Hermes, the Greek ancient god, or Thoth, the Egyptian equivalent. The Egyptian god, he was associated with writing, magic, wisdom, and the moon. So under Hermeticism, we can look to it as the oldest knowledge that has ever existed, and that is fundamental to how the universe operates. As Matt LaCroix stated, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, every time the balance, like the scale is uneven, this type of knowledge has to resurface. Hermeticism needs to resurface so that it can balance out the scale again. It is what makes the world go around. It is the explanation to everything. So in this episode, he was presenting how Hermeticism, the depth of it, is actually encoded in all of these ancient structures. Specifically, he was going over this T shape that you can find, again, in all of these ancient structures throughout the world, which is interesting to think about because when you look at the distance between Peru to Egypt and so on and so forth, how were they communicating with each other? So his theory was that roughly around 40,000 years ago, humanity reached a point of consciousness that was so advanced. Today, we can't even imagine how advanced it was. They reached the pinnacle of magic, really. And by magic, I mean just the natural order of how this world should be operating. And that's why they created all of these insane structures. Again, I'm paraphrasing here, and then he touches up on fractal and sacred geometry and all that, which I'm not going to get into. I'm not good at math, so I can't even attempt to explain that to you. But this is what I found really interesting when he was kind of breaking all of this down. He was talking about the 15th century Roman Byzantine Empire, while Constantinople was collapsing, how he says all these people that were associated with these secret societies, they kind of vanished. All of these people that were deep in the practice of Hermeticism, so think Greece and Turkey. So during this period, hundreds of, if not hundreds of thousands of them suddenly vanished. And he said they kind of all reappeared in Florence, Italy, because at the time, Italy was like the leading place of intellectual thought at the time. So because they were practicing Hermeticism, in Hermeticism, you don't believe that your body is separate from the cosmos. Everything is one. And he had really beautiful slides that interpreted this message really well, I thought. So around this time, Christianity as a religion began to rise. While this was happening, so around this time, the church hired this guy named Isaac Casaubon. My bad if I butchered that, but he was born in Geneva to 2 French refugees, and he was a classical scholar. So the church hires this dude to basically date Hermeticism as a philosophy, pretty much. And this was an effort to manipulate those that practiced Hermeticism, kind of stray them away from this and push them more towards the church. And the thing with Hermeticism is that it was rewritten over and over again, kind of like the Bible, like it was rewritten over and over again, spanning thousands and thousands of years. So he comes in out of nowhere and he's like, hey, actually these texts that you guys are following aren't as old as you think they are. And he planted dates that confused these people. Eventually, Christianity just became that girl, like everybody was just flocking to Christianity. And he makes an interesting point. He's like, yeah, throughout time, when you look to the Druids and the pagans and all of these people, you see how those people who were linked to Hermeticism or anything close to that were persecuted and burned at the stake. And it happened time and time again throughout history. All of those that kind of held on tight to Hermeticism, that fractured into secret societies, like Freemasonry, for example. They also had these mystery schools. At one point, they were teaching certain gifted people the ancient secrets of the world, or what became secrets, which was once just looked at as how the world, how civilization operated. Anyways, I know I'm not doing the greatest job at explaining this, so I tagged that episode in the description. I made this video as short as possible because I'm not a historian. I'm just a regular person. I'm kind of a normie, but I'm very open-minded when it comes to being a normie. There's like different levels of normies, you guys. Some people just accept official narratives, and then others are open-minded, but they don't have, the capacity to explain all of this to you. So I highly recommend you check out that video because he's the one who did all this research, and it's fascinating, especially if you're into ancient architecture and Hermeticism as a philosophy. Now, recently, I got into astrology after writing it off for so long because there was a few people on, I'm not going to say who, but they were able to predict certain cycles regarding particular conflicts we're in today correctly. And there are also people who bet on the market that go to these astrologers for predictions. So I don't know, that kind of just led me down a rabbit hole. And then I started looking into it and realized, oh, it's actually not that woo-woo after all if you understand how the ancients used it, for instance. Also, there's different philosophies of astrology. So maybe a lot of it is woo-woo. And that's the thing. It's like I don't really connect that much with woo-woo people. I don't really respond well to flowery language, like poetic language, when people are talking about serious things. I like to read poetry, but I don't like to communicate that way, if that makes any sense. So I've always written off all these things, but when it's explained to me in a scientific way, I tend to respond to it much better, if that makes sense. So yeah, I like serious people explaining mystical things to me, I guess. I've also been reading about astrologers for like the last 15 years. So I don't know why, but in that moment, when I was reading Babylon's Banksters, I talked about it on this channel. I talked about it on my TikTok. I actually got a strike on my TikTok for talking about that book, by the way. I don't know, it just clicked. So I started looking into astrology myself. And it's fascinating, the prediction of cycles. So jumping back to Hermeticism, when we're talking about this as a philosophy, and perhaps connect that to the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Sphinx and all that, I don't know, paints reality under a different light. So anyway, check out that episode. It's really interesting. And also, do you guys think Hermeticism will no longer be shunned as it was in the past one day? Like maybe we might live to see Hermeticism exploding, and maybe not in a woo-woo commercialized and demonized way anymore. Maybe it's something to consider. LaCroix also pointed out, look at how we treat each other today. Look at how this world operates. We're killing each other over what? And we're using all of our space resources to what? Explore the stars? Like, what are we doing? He made a lot of good points as to why we should probably, as a civilization, start to look at things under a different light. I don't know if people are willing to let go of their religion. I mean, I find religion in a lot of things, even in pop culture. Like, people are religious when it comes to pop culture, when it comes to politics, and they just plant all of their faith into these things. So I don't know. I do agree with him with the fact that, you know, we are misinterpreting ourselves. Like, we're living inverted versions of ourselves. This isn't how human beings are supposed to be living. We shouldn't be operating the way we are today. I do agree with that. We can be doing a lot better as a civilization. I agree with him on that. I thought that episode was powerful. He has a very passionate way of speaking. So anyways, I just thought it was interesting.